Morning, Tri-Cities. It's Friday at 9 o'clock, and it's time for Coffee with Karl. I'm Karl Dye from Trideck, and today is our housing outlook for our 23rd annual Economic Outlook. It's our pleasure to welcome Ron Almberg, who's the board chair from the Tri-City Association of Realtors. Good morning, Ron. Oh,
classic mistake.
Yep, we're on Zoom, so somebody has to unmute themselves. Good morning, Ron.
Good morning, Karl. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Thanks for joining us this morning. And Jeff Losey is the executive director of the Home Builders Association of Tri-Cities. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Karl. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And go Cougs. You pulled up a little bit, but I know you got that Cougar sweater vest on.
Yeah, and I noticed in
there, right?
Yeah, and I noticed in my picture too, I had on my Cougar tie. So yes, I am very themed.
Repping.
It's one of the best things about living in the Tri-Cities, which is, in the thousands, but it's very, very positive to be a loyal Coug here, and it's awesome.
It is fun. It is fun and a great school, and my son is graduating from there this May, so I got another Coug in the family, so it's great.
That's awesome. Well, let's get started here. Our tradition is that we talk about our coffee or coffee mugs. I'm going to kick us off talking about a mug that Tracy actually gave me for Christmas. Starbucks coffee, obviously a play on Starbucks, but we love pugs in our family. We have a whole, I guess if you have more than two, it's a grumble. So we have a grumble of pugs. They're all rescue pugs, and it's kind of corny, but really, really appreciate the mug. It's a good mug, and we love pugs. So you bet. Ron, how about you? Do you have a mug or coffee story for us this morning? Yeah,
I got I got two cups, but this is one I usually go with, just the Hustle Juice mug. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't function until after about my first pot of coffee. So
there you go.
Live off the caffeine.
That's great. Jeff, how about you? I'm gonna guess, is it Cougar related?
No, it's not. It's not. And this is, I'm sure that everybody that watches every episode with Coffee with Karl has already seen this, but it's going to be Groundhog's Day. I'm still supporting and rocking with my friends over at Habitat. Jet Richardson's executive director, and obviously they're in the building family, and it's part of what we do. And we appreciate what Habitat does for the community in helping make sure that there's opportunities for all to get into a home. And so anyways, that's my mug this morning.
It's such a great cause too. And I want to throw in a plug for the Restore, right? Which is anybody can donate building supplies, building materials. So if you're remodeled, sinks, anything, I think they'll take. And it's a great resource for folks that are looking for options out there as it comes to anything housing related, I think, as far as construction, which is part of their fundraising arm, I think, for Habitat. They do a great job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Ron, we're going to start off with you. I think you've got some slides for us, and we'll run through those, and then we'll bring Jeff back on. Jeff's got some slides, and then we'll got to get into some questions.
Sure.
Let's go ahead and kick it off. I'll just say for anybody out there, if you have a question as Ron and Jeff are going through their slides, you can ask a question in the question answer feature down below. If you're watching this on Zoom, if you're on Facebook, you can put a question in the comment section, and we'll do our best to get to everybody. So take it away, Ron.
All right. Thanks, Karl. Really appreciate it. Really glad to be here with Jeff and the HBA. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the market as it's appearing today, and some of that's going to be looking at 2021 statistics. As we all know, most of our market reflection is what happened 60-90 days ago, because if I put a home under contract today, it doesn't close for another 45 days typically, right? So looking at the history of our statistics and what's been going on in the market really gives us a really good idea of what's happening in the market in the past, but how that's affecting today, and also forward looking too. Hopefully if things continue, we have a pretty good idea of what the market's going to look like going forward in this next year. And so I want to show that with some of the statistics that I pulled right out of our MLS. Okay. And I find some of these really interesting. I just want to highlight a few of these. And there's a lot of numbers on these slides, and I'm just going to point out a few of them, Karl, because I don't want to get lost in the weeds.
Sounds
But
good.
if you look at the bottom half of this 2021 market statistic here, you'll notice that it breaks down the real estate statistics according to the number of bedrooms: 1 to 2 bedroom homes, 3 bedroom homes, and 4+ homes. And what I want you to notice here is that in the real estate sales of last year, we had roughly a little over 5,000 homes that were sold. The bulk of those are in those 3 bedroom homes, which that's a pretty typical standard home. But then you notice that the sale price per listing price ratio. Notice that all of the homes that were sold pretty much sold at 100% of what the list price was, or even a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the craziness that many of us have been seeing in the real estate market is, I remember the day not too long ago where, I could tell my buyers, yeah, we could probably come in 3% or 5% underneath the list price and get your offer accepted. That's not the case today.
Yeah.
So it's really tough convincing buyers who really want a home that, listen, you're going to have to come in at least at the list price and probably a little over the list price if you want to be competitive in a market that has multiple offers on a home. So that statistic tells us right there that the market is very strong. You'll notice that the average list price versus average sale price, right there in the middle of those lower columns. So the average list price for a 3-bedroom home is $369. The sold price was $374. So that tells you right there, it's $5,000 more than what the list price was, right? Or at the 4+ bedrooms, $484, and the sold price is $489. So that's a hard reality, particularly for a lot of our younger families who are trying to get into the market. That we've just seen the market prices go up, and I'm going to show a slide here in just a moment. The other thing I want you to notice here is look at the next to the last column, the average list price unsold. Now notice that. So at the beginning, it shows us that we had 400 homes listed on the 1 to 2 bedroom, but only 343 sold. So not every home sold, some of them, but you'll notice that average list price unsold, how much higher it is.
Yeah.
So buyers aren't that desperate.
Right.
That's what that's telling us is that buyers are still pretty cautious. They're not going to way overpay, not in this market. We are not like a Seattle market. I mean, for us who've lived in the Tri-Cities for a long time or grew up here, it seems insane. But, I'm talking to realtors on the other side of the state where homes are going for hundreds of thousands of dollars more than list prices. We are not that market.
Yeah.
And thankfully so. Let's go to the next slide here. I want to show you this one here. So these next 2 slides are going to be kind of a comparison, because what I want you to see here is where the bulk of our sales are. So if you move down the scale down here, the bulk of the sales start at that 200,000 mark. Do you see that? Yeah. Between 200,000 and 250, we had 337 listings, right? And the average days on the market were 19. These are sold properties, 337 sold. The average days, 19 days in the market, which is pretty fast. And then you'll notice 250 to 300, 591, and then 300 to 400, jumps up a huge jump to 1,785. And then from 400 to 500,000, 1,042. And then over 5,000, 1,078. So the bulk of our market is in that 300 to 500 plus range. Again, to me, emphasizing the pressure that is on that lower end market for first-time home buyers. It's very, very difficult. And I think that's reflected in the fact that the FHA loan limit was bumped up to 427,000 this last year.
Wow. So
now an FHA buyer can qualify, if all things being right, can qualify up to $427,000 for an FHA loan. All right. I want you to keep where that bubble is. Look at where that bubble is here, all right? In that 250 to 500 plus. Let's go to this next two slides, because what I did was I ran some statistics. What if we went 5 years back to 2016? What was the market like in 2016? And what if we went 10 years back? What was the market like back in 2011? And I want you to know where that bubble has shifted, right? So even 5 years ago, homes over 500,000 was pretty limited.
Yeah.
Right. And you'll notice that that bubble really starts about the $160,000 mark. So 160,000 to 400,000 is really where that bubble is of the bulk of our home sales. Right. So just in this last 5 years, they've jumped from that 160 to 400,000 and has shifted. There's been a huge shift. Now let's go back 10 years, and you'll notice that the bubble starts at about the 120,000 range and goes up to the $250,000, $300,000 range. So just in the last 10 years in the real estate market in the Tri-Cities, we've seen the bulk of our sales shift up. Now, again, some of that has to do with, we've seen historically low interest rates. Right. And that's allowed home buyers to be able to afford more home for their dollar. Now, here's another interesting statistic. Let's go to the next slide. And you'll notice in this next slide here, what I did was I ran a market conditions report. And this is a report that pretty much every appraiser is going to run when they're doing an appraisal on a house. And it kind of tells us what's going on in the market. And there's some really interesting scenarios. So this is for 2021. Then the last slide I have will show us what's happening in the first quarter of 2022. But what I want you to notice is the bottom half of this chart here. The comparable sales price over this last year started at 362, 732. Then 6 months ago was 391. And in the last 3 months of 2021 jumped up to 395. That's just within 2021, from 362 to 395, which is pretty much kind of what we saw across the board in the Tri-Cities.
It's like about 10%, right? 10%
about
a year.
10%.
Wow.
And keep in mind, that's across the Tri-Cities. In some neighborhoods in the Tri-Cities, we've seen home prices jump up as much as 20%.
Yeah.
All right. And notice the days on market, 4 days, 4 days, 5 days. Homes are not sitting on, if they're priced right, they are not on the market for very long, right? And I want you to notice again the comparable list price versus the comparable sales price, right? So the list price is one thing, the sales price is another. It's actually a little less. So again, I think that tells us that in our market, buyers aren't, in our market, in the Tri-City market, buyers aren't spending crazy amounts over the list price like they're doing in some of the metro markets, Seattle, Portland. I even hearing stories from some of the agents down in Boise, Idaho, where what buyers are offering over the list price is crazy. Let's go to the last one because I want to look at the first quarter of this year. So you'll notice that the comparable price jumped up to 431,850. All right. So that's from 395. At the end of 2021 is 395. The first quarter, we're up to another $40,000. So almost a 20% from 362 to 431 from spring of last year to this year. So the question I often get is, number one is, how come home prices are rising so much, and why is it so difficult? And keep in mind too, some of the things that I'm seeing in the market is not just first-time home buyers, but some of our older folks who own their 1970 split-level home that they've been in for 40 years, and they'd like to get out of that because climbing stairs is more difficult. But if they sold that, what are they going to buy? So even for some of our older folks, getting into the home that they'll be in at the end of their years is becoming somewhat difficult. Yeah. So anyway, I just find these statistics very interesting, and I think it's a great reflection on the market. And I think that a huge part of that is home building and home construction. And Jeff is going to be able to address that, because that is a huge part of our real estate market right now.
Thanks, Ron. I think those are really good slides. The thing that struck me in showing the increase in the median, and then even the 2000, the 5 years ago and the 10 years ago, is that they're the same homes, right? Like, this isn't necessarily right. The new homes that Jeff and his guys are bringing online, like, oh, the new houses are bigger or they're more expensive, and that's what's driving the price up. These are the same homes, to your point. These are the split levels that have been here since the 70s, along with the new homes and everything else. It's that average that right. Has seen that kind of appreciation, which is pretty mind-blowing, I think, in general, for sure.
I moved here in 1997 in West Richland, and Bombing Range Road ended at a certain point up there in what we call Bird Hill. Yeah, Paradise was just a dirt road. And I remember when the new homes being built on the other end of Bombing Range toward Keene and Kennedy, and it started, big sign said new homes starting at $79,900. Right. Yeah. And now those same homes today are selling for well over $300,000.
Yeah.
Same home.
Yeah, no, we just to take advantage of the low interest rates before they started going up, we just refinanced our home, even though we've only been in it 2 years. And I look back at what it sold for. I think our house is like 10 or 12 years ago, and I think it appraised for 3 times what it originally sold for, 12 years ago. So we've seen that in our home, and like, we've only been here 2 years, so it's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Ron.
Yeah, Jeff, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's great. We'll go through Jeff's slides, and then we'll open it back up. Looks like we got a couple questions coming in. We'll get into those and have a good discussion. So, Jeff, take it away.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I was going to pick on Chris Johnson, because I heard him talking about the $99,000 homes, and I'm like, you sound like my grandpa when he's talking about they used to buy a house for $30,000. But Ron, no offense. You and I have both been around a long time, and we do remember those signs. But yeah, when the price of a lot is now what you used to be able to buy the whole right. house and lot for, it makes it extremely difficult. So I'm going to cover the stats for Tri-Cities, and then we'll talk. I'll end it with where our affordability is. So Tracy, you can go ahead and advance and to the next one. So, and this is just permits over the last 5 years. I'll go through all of our local jurisdictions and where they're at. And I think most of us know, if you've spent any time driving around the backside of what we affectionately know as Thompson Hill, the Southridge development in Kennewick, that's where most of the homes are being built currently in Kennewick. And even though there's a dip where it went from 290 homes permitted in 2020 to 238 in 2021, that is purely just a function of having land available to get the homes built. And if you go out there now, you'll see there is a lot of unearthed dirt. The lots are getting put together, however, trying to catch up with what has been built. This is why there's a little bit of that lag. Next one. And this, for each one, will go into the average value. And this is the average value of the new homes. And I'll quantify this with the numbers that you see on here. When a building permit gets turned in, there is a number that they use that's generated from a national average on what it is, price per square foot, to come up with the valuation of these homes. So a $345,000 average number is based on that average. So it's not always indicative of what the final price of those homes are going to be. And we'll get into that a little bit more too. But as you can see, even with that, it's a substantial increase. Next one. Moving over to Pasco. And Pasco traditionally, just like Franklin County, has been one of the fastest growing cities and counties in the state. And this just is, again, another reflection of, once they've filled all the lots that they have that are available to build on, until that UGA increase gets approved and they're able to get those lots platted and built, that's why you can see a little bit of that slowdown. But we expect that that's going to pick up again as they've got the infrastructure and everything else ready to go. It's just getting the final approval to get that UGA out there so they can continue that growth. Next one. Average value in Pasco. This isn't going to be a shocker to anybody watching this, but the average value for each one of these is going to be up in every jurisdiction across the board. We'll go to the next one. Single family permits in Richland. And again, this is Badger Mountain South is obviously the prime driver for the city of Richland. They continue to move through Badger Mountain South and get each phase ready to go. And obviously they had a bit of an increase than they did in the prior year. Next slide. Average value in Richland, again, jumped up just like it has in every other jurisdiction. And that's not an indicator of all costs, but the majority of those. Next slide. In West Richland, and anybody that's been out to West Richland and talking about Ajo, they've been one of the big drivers of these permits out on the ranch, we call it, but they have just ballooned since they, again, if there's lots that are available and ready to be built on, you can see the intrinsic rise starting from 2018 to 2020 when they actually had the buildable land. And as you can see, it's taken off. Next one. Average value in West Richland, although it's off from where it was in 2018, there was quite a few fewer homes in 2018 compared to where they're at in 2021, which caused a fluctuation in the number, however, still up over 2020. Next slide. Now we move out into the county, and traditionally the county properties, those are larger lots, which typically means you've got a higher value associated with those. And again, their permits are up. We'll go to the next one. The average value in Benton County jumped up considerably to 347. Next slide. Franklin County just stayed identical. Next slide. And again, the values out in the county are traditionally higher than what they are inside of the cities, inside of the UGAs. Next slide. And now we're going to look at just the totals for all of the averages for 2021. So 1,647 permits were pulled in 2021 compared to 1,695 in 2020. So we did not increase year over year. And I go back to Pasco has always been a big driver. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And this shows you a little bit better. Pasco is sitting there at that 352 and Richland at the 407. Traditionally, Pasco is about 30% of all the permits that are pulled. So when Pasco is down, it drags the entire number down, which decreases that total number of output. And that's just the fluctuality of the lots that are able to be built on and when they're ready to go. And you can see back in 2020, 2019, that orange mark for Pasco, traditionally they're setting the bar, but because they don't have that land ready to go, it's caused them to decrease, which has lowered the entire number for the permits by our jurisdiction. Next slide. So now we're going to get into what's happening with affordability in Tri-Cities. And the first one, go ahead, Tracy. So this is Washington State, and then we're going to drill it down to our local area. But in the pie, as you can read, 24% of the families cannot afford a median new priced home in Washington State, which then takes us to 76% of the families cannot afford a home at a median price of $565,000. The income needed to qualify for that is $130,000, and they would need a household income of $73,000 to be able to get into that. And when we talk about, when I say we, when I'm at council meetings and commission meetings, every time there is a new fee or a new cost that goes on to the price of a home, at the bottom of this underneath, you'll see that for every $1,000 increase added to the cost of constructing a home, 2,182 more families in Washington state cannot afford a median new priced home in Washington state. So do costs matter? They cost a lot. So with every new regulation and or fee, it just means somebody else is not going to be able to afford a home. Let's move to Tri-Cities. Next slide. Kennewick and Richland. This is as an MSA, 20% of the families that are here can afford a home, and 80% of those that are here cannot. And our median new home price is $569. And the income needed to qualify that is going to be $132. So as we're talking about jobs, whether it's from Amazon or Dairy Gold, these are some of those limiting factors on the median price of a home in Tri-Cities and what it takes to qualify for those if you can. And then down at the bottom of this one, for every $1,000 increase in added to the cost of constructing a home, there's 80 families that now cannot afford that home. And, you know, and some of those factors that we'll get into when we talk about the GMA is one of the issues that helps drive up that cost. And I also put in a slide in here just to compare to Walla Walla. And let's go to the next one. So their median new home price is less than Tri-Cities, and traditionally Walla Walla has been higher even on the median new home price because they are a slower growing community. But even at that lower median new price, 84% of the families in Walla Walla cannot afford a home, where 16% can. And for every $1,000, 13 more families can't afford it every time they go through there. And for me, these slides, Tracy, can you go back up to the Tri-Cities one? I think this is the crux of what our challenges are in talking about workforce housing, income needed to qualify. And I think, you know, some of Ron's slides and the data that are in there, if 80% of the families that live here can't afford that, the homes that are here, I do believe there are some of that urban shift, people that have left the city core and want that suburban lifestyle, but can afford to have the ability to work from home. I think that has a drive on where they're moving to, and it might be out of the Seattle city core into places, whether it's Yakima, Cle Elum, Tri-Cities, Spokane, because even this, as Ron stated earlier, with the pricing in Seattle and those other areas, we're still affordable from what they have to face. And so I think that leads us here. That's it for the slides, Tracy.
Yeah. Jeff, thanks for sharing those. The thing that struck me on the Tri-Cities one was that the gap in between the median, what you need to qualify for the average new home, was almost twice of, you know, I mean, the numbers are pretty clear. It's almost, you need to earn twice as much money, whether it's, you know, 2-income family or 1-income family, to be able to afford that average new home price, which is gap's huge. And your pie charts are great to show what that discrepancy is.
Yeah, you know, and I guess this is probably a good time to talk about. So the Growth Management Act, and when we talked about the cost of housing and going back to the price of homes 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when you could buy a home for $100,000. I mean, Ron, tell me if I'm wrong, but right now to buy a lot in Tri-Cities, you're starting at $80,000 to $100,000 for a lot that doesn't give you a river view. It's not on a hill. That's just for a lot. That's just what used to be ordinary 20 years ago that you could get for $30,000 is now up $80,000 to $100,000.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, in some places, that lot will cost you 110 to 130,000, and not view lots. But the price of development has gone up, right? And so even just to move the dirt to get it ready to be built is costing, the cost of develop, the cost of the dirt has gone up. And so, yeah, that has, it wasn't that long ago that in West Richland, when I was doing a model home there for a builder, a lot was 45, 50,000. That was not that long ago.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jeff, you hit on it. And there was a question that I had for Ron. We'll get into our discussion part, but Ron, do you have any, and I don't know if the Realtor Association tracks it or just you and with your shop there, if you guys track it, remote workers that Jeff talked about. Like, I think we all have that feeling, or it feels like, yeah, we're getting folks that can work from anywhere, and they are looking for that suburban, maybe it's people that grew up here and, they were on the West Side and kind of now they're married, they got kids, they want to kind of come back home to raise their kids over here, and they can work here. And so they're earning, a higher wage from the West Side. Do you have any feeling for that statistically, or even just anecdotally? Is that part of what's driving some of the demand side and some of the, price inflation for homes around here?
Yeah, well, I think there are two. Number one, we have a large bubble of people aging into the home buying market. That I think that's something that's not considered. We have one of the largest bubbles of population aging into the home buying market right now that we haven't seen in probably 20 years. But having said that, yes, we just anecdotally, I know that in our office, we've had a lot of people moving in here from the metro areas on the other side of the state, particularly. A large home I had for sale in Canyon Lakes was over $1 million, and somebody sold their home in Redmond for almost $2 million and came and paid cash here, right? My real estate partner, she sold a home to some people who they found it cheaper to buy a home here and commute to Seattle than to live in Seattle. So we are seeing that. So I think it's a combination of two. I think there are people who they're getting out of and realizing the equity that they have in their homes over there and coming over here because we are much more affordable to live. For us who have lived here for, like I said, I've been here for 25 years or longer. That doesn't make sense to us. But, I have family that live in the Seattle, Tacoma area, and they've lived there all their lives. I grew up over there, and it's just shocking the cost of living over there and how much their homes have appreciated, and then the taxes that go with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing when you think about somebody commuting to Seattle, but some of the data sets that we subscribe to, when we look at commuting counties, and I did want to give a clarification too. I think Jeff and maybe Ron both mentioned our metropolitan statistical area. That's a census designation that we have. And so it includes everybody in both Franklin and Benton counties. And so when we talk about the MSA, it's both of our counties together, which obviously include Pasco, West Richland, Richland, and Kennewick as the cities, and then but also the smaller cities that are out there. But I think when we look at the data at commuting counties, King County is actually our second county that people that live here in our MSA commute to, and we were kind of scratching our heads about it, but that makes sense. And I think even maybe with people's flexible work schedules, maybe you can. I mean, if you made enough money on your house and buy something that to them is cheaper over here, maybe you could even fly into the office, work 2 days, in the office, and then or something. I mean, as things change and even the way that we work change, it's interesting to see the effect that it has on housing here locally.
I think that's key, Carl. I think you said the way we work has changed, and I think we've seen that. I think the pandemic has done that, and people have become very creative in how they can work remotely, or like I said, commute a couple days a week and then spend their the rest of their time here in the Tri-Cities. I mean, they love the weather, they love the affordable housing compared to where they had been, and the cost of living.
Well, and I think there was a shift, which you were alluded to, Carl, which was it was hard for employers to imagine that somebody could still be productive if they weren't in the office.
Yeah.
Because the assumption was is you're working 100% of the time that you are at work, but that's just not a reality. And then with the COVID shutdown, it forced everybody into that opportunity to take a look at the productivity that they didn't lose by having people at home. It makes sense to me to have that hybrid where you've got, whether it's a day or two, and it wouldn't surprise me if they were commuting over for a day or two a week and the rest of the time able to work from home.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great point. I am reminded of a management or organizational communications class I took a long time ago in college. And they were talking about time of work studies, right? And productivity, like this concept shortly after the Industrial Revolution, maybe like in the teens and 20s, where they're like, hey, let's do some studies on how productive are people and what kind of management does it take. And essentially what I remember was like, well, if you sit there and watch somebody, you know, the typist in those days would, you know, be more productive, but if you don't watch them, they're not. And I think it's just fostered this generational assumption that, well, you got to be in the office and you got to punch the time card and you got to be right there in the desk. And I think that's something where we've all experienced that, right? I mean, I know for our team, we do have the office open, but we're in hybrid. And I think that's one of the flexibilities we want to give to all of our team members is, you know, what we care about is the work, right? It's the output. It doesn't matter where you do it or when you do it. If you can manage that successfully and still get your work done, that's ultimately all it comes down to. And it's interesting that, as you say, that shift is having some effect on our housing market, on that affordability factor. Yeah.
Yep. No, for sure.
On that point for remote work, Jeff, I don't know if with your builders, you know, with your members, is there a change in new housing construction that has changed? I don't know, like floor plans or technology that goes into a new house? Are you seeing shifts that way, kind of trying to build for the market, if you will, or that segment of the market?
Yeah, I mean, I would say inherently it hasn't taken over like what you're suggesting, which is most of it is still, I mean, we have the one-offs and the opportunities because like one of the best houses I ever saw in our annual parade of homes was this mother-in-law suite that was like attached but totally detached. And whether or not you made that your office, but it had its own parking area, its own little mini kitchen. But in talking about creating those other opportunities, I know we've seen the trend that with interest rates as low as they are, with no inventory and nowhere to move to, that remodeling and creating more of those spaces. So there's more impotence, certainly looking into making what used to be an office that may have been the just where you would put stuff because you had nowhere else to put it. Well, now those offices in homes are being utilized for offices. So I guess to a certain degree, yes, I don't think it's the entire focus. And now because everything is wireless, I mean, as long as you can get fiber to your place, I mean,
right.
Everything's wireless. So you don't have to wire everything, which makes all of that inherently easier as well as technology progresses.
Totally. Oh, that's great. We did have a couple questions come in. I think the one that was relative to some of the information that Ron was bringing, they said they've noticed the homes listed for auction. What's driving local homes to be listed on auction sites? And I'm thinking like, I wasn't here in the last recession, and what people have told me about Tri-Cities is we didn't really see maybe even on the housing sector as much of an impact because of the last recession here. I was up in North Idaho, and I got to tell you, like, you know, almost overnight, buildings shut down, construction shut down, sawmills that were making softwood lumber shut down, had a big impact. And obviously a lot of homes in an overinflated market went into foreclosure, and then there were a lot of foreclosure and auction sales. But I don't know, Ron, have you seen more homes listed on auction sites? And I got to assume that there aren't foreclosures because the market's increasing or ascending. Have you seen that?
Well, and exactly. And you know, the equity that people have in their home typically overrides that. Yeah. I personally haven't seen that. I've only seen a couple auctions in the Tri-Cities over the last few months. Yeah. So I personally haven't seen that. We're not seeing that. You know, back when 2008, 9, 10, we did see some bank loan properties.
Yeah.
But we're not seeing that right now. And I think some of that is because people have a huge amount of equity in their home and they can restructure their financing to be able to stay in their home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Just think back to the slides that you both showed, which were great. Ron, it was cool how you kind of showed what's the majority of the market of homes that are sold and the price range that's there, and shown, over time how it's moved up. And then, Jeff, from the building point of view, you talked about some of the new stuff on the backside of, or, adjacent to Southridge on the Bob Olson Parkway, back in there in Kennewick as an example. But, the type of housing product that's being built, and from a home builder's perspective, how much can they try to match the market? Obviously, like, we can look at sales, which is kind of maybe a 6 month, kind of looking behind us, but is it really, maybe from a home builder's perspective, and realizing every cost has gone up, obviously labor, all of the supplies that go into the home, the dirt's more expensive, changes in building codes and energy efficiency, right, from your regulatory point of view, have driven up those costs. But, as far as you choose, like, what type of home do you build? And as we saw, that 3+ bedroom is kind of maybe like our sweet spot. But I'm trying to, I guess where I'm trying to go with this question, not doing a good job, but is to say, on that lower end of the spectrum, we talked about the first time home buyer. We all talk about the first rung on the housing ladder that people want to get into so that they can, go through those rungs and see some value increase in their homes. But it feels like, from a home builder's perspective, it's like, everything I build, I got a waiting list for people that are waiting into it. Is that kind of the feeling that you get? I don't even know if I've asked a question now, but
well, no, I'm sort of following you, Karl, and I'm gonna try to bring
I'm kind
this
of
back.
rambling now.
Well, just tell me if I'm completely off base. But what I can share with you is, just because you build it doesn't mean somebody's going to buy it, right? And I'm going to go back to Badger Mountain South when it first started. Yeah. You could not have a garage in the front. It all had to be rear loaded. You have to have a porch on every home. It couldn't be bigger than 2-car garage. They struggled for years until the builders that they wanted to have in there, they said, listen, if we're going to come in there and build, like, you've got to relax this. We need to have the garage around the front. We got to be able to go to a 3-car garage. So to your point, the builders aren't going to build it and hope that they're going to come. And at the end of the day, the mix that you're talking about, like, where is that entry level housing going to happen? Part of that comes down to the zoning in the cities and having the ability to create those opportunities for smaller lots, smaller homes. And that isn't super easy to get to either. Yeah, we're working on it right now in the city of Pasco, and we've offered some suggestions to be more creative on the zoning side of it. But even at that, Karl, I mean, it's just one of those things that it's in Walla right now. They were one of the first ones to do it, where they relaxed all of their zoning. And so anything that you want to build in the city of Walla can be done. However, most people still want to match what's already existing. Sure. And so you end up in that quagmire of, it really hasn't done anything to affect the affordability. And so as we sit here in Tri-Cities and trying to figure out where are those workers going to go for those entry-level homes, well, part of that's going to be some of the zoning changes and requirements with setbacks, side yards, and how much they have to eat up in just land to then get that smaller footprint. Because right now, some of the codes don't allow you to build that smaller footprint inside of the city. So it's not as easy as you would think to do that, because then you have to get the zoning passed through. And so it's the builders are building what they know they can sell. Yeah. And all day long, they're selling the 3-bedroom, the 4-bedroom / den office. And that is the sweet spot. And so, like I said, when the zoning allows for those other opportunities to get those smaller homes, smaller lots, that's when those opportunities might come up that somebody can get into that But Carl, I also wanted to mention that one of the things that I heard on the national level when talking about vacancies in apartments in multifamily is since COVID and the shutdown that happened in Washington State and Oregon, as far as where you couldn't evict somebody, that kind of sent ripples through some of the national folks on whether or not they would consider investing into more of those large projects in a state like Washington, where if it happened again, there's no protection for the landlord, if you will. And so that we'll see how that one plays out, and if that one has a long-term effect of people not, when I'm talking people, I'm talking large corporations wanting to invest money into apartments to help alleviate our problem. That could have another effect, a chilling effect on having less opportunities because of some of those regulations that have come out of it.
Well, Jeff, Carl, can I talk a little bit? So what I'm seeing on the smaller level, on the individual or small mom and pop landlord, they're getting out. I had an investor who, this was last year, he divested himself of all of his rental homes. So that's less homes to rent on the market. Now, the good thing is it freed it up for somebody to be able to buy that home because they were in the under $300,000 range.
Sure.
But now we have less single family homes to rent, because what I'm seeing in the market is a lot of these people, they just don't see the risk value there anymore because of some of the landlord tenant laws that are taking place. The other question I had for Jeff that I've been wondering about, Jeff, is what about the building of townhomes or condominiums? I know there's been some movement at the state level to changing the liability laws around building condominiums and things like that. Do you see that as an avenue for being able to help affordability in housing?
Absolutely. I think that's going to be one of the keys, is because that's the only other way, right, that you can get the cost down, because you don't have as much land tied up. But absolutely, yes, that's one of the big keys on trying to make the affordability opportunities, is to allow more flexibility in those townhomes or condos or whatever they're going to be. But that would be a less expensive pathway to ownership.
The other thing I'm noticing, and I'm curious if you've seen it too, Jeff, is the kind of interesting thing is, builders are going farther out. So there's a huge development up in Connell, right? So it'll be interesting to see whether people are willing to buy, quote unquote, more affordable housing in Connell and then commute to the Tri-Cities. I moved to Benton City about 7 years ago because I was able to buy a brand new construction there for much cheaper than what I would have been able to buy in Tri-Cities proper. But now the alfalfa field next to me has 42 homes on it. And the cost of construction, I mean, so to get into a new home in Benton City is as much as what it would have cost if I was going to buy one in West Richland or Richland proper. So I'm wondering, are we seeing some of that urban effect where people in our cities are moving out, willing to commute into the Tri-Cities?
Well, and I think, and then Carl, I'm trying not to, sorry, we're having a conversation.
No, this is perfect. Go for it.
Well, and what I would say is, because this takes me back to, I don't know if Ron, you remember this, but back when Walla Walla was booming and Bend, Oregon was booming, they had actual signs that said, "Don't bend in Walla Walla." And because prices in Bend, Oregon were just going through the roof, and they're like, well, we don't want that here. And so they did everything they could to contain the growth in Walla Walla. But, and at that time, I was looking at places like Park City, Utah. So in Park City, the people that work there, none of them live there. They can't afford to live there. And so they all commute from somewhere else.
Right.
And do I think it's plausible for that to happen? Yes. And I would say that that's the GMA, it absolutely is the thorn in the side of every jurisdiction, where the goal of it is supposed to be centralized planning for the local jurisdictions. But the problem is, it's more expensive because you've restricted the supply. And the city of Kennewick that just now got its light industrial out in the UGA going to the south of Kennewick, which is critical, but they had to wait years for this to happen before they could actually make progress on this. And because of that, and I think I mentioned it last time, Karl, but the school districts, they can purchase land outside of the UGA. And that was a legislative pass that they did. And the reason they want to purchase outside of the UGA is because it's cheaper.
Right.
But private companies can't do it. And so as we're fighting, you know, these lot prices that are 100, 110, 120, and they're just ordinary run-of-the-mill lots, but at that price starting point for the land, it's hard to say you can have affordable housing without having, you know, a very tiny home on there, because even if you're going to pull up your RV on it, the RVs aren't any less expensive than what they have been. You're still going to be at $200,000. So all of these things being considered, it's like the GMA is still one of the things that's driving up the cost of land and making it so housing affordability is such a hard stretch to do. And I think we're seeing it now. And then if the push from the city core is still coming to places like Tri-Cities, because $600,000 for them, it's nothing compared to what they're faced with in those city cores. And if that's who's purchasing the homes here, well, then that just exacerbates the problem we have, which is the folks that are living and working here. My son is trying to they're trying to purchase their first house. And he goes, well, should I wait? And I go, you shouldn't wait, but because the water level is what it is. It's not going to it's not going to precipitously go back down. And the prices are going to continue to go up because we still are, the quality of life and the affordability of our homes, even though it is feeling unaffordable right now to a lot of our residents, as I was able to share, that waiting, it's just going to cost more. And then obviously with interest rates hike that are intended to go up another 4 or 5 times this year into next year, is going to make it obviously even harder to qualify for those homes. And it's going to be less of a home. But the only other thing that's going to give is you've got to do a smaller lot, smaller house to try to get the price down. And which is what they're doing with food, right? Because now you get less potato chips in the bag. They just put less in there, but it's the same size. They're just more air.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point, Jeff, because I have buyers who just lost $40,000 in buying power because of the interest rate bump. So instead of being able to shop at 475, now I'm looking at 435, maybe.
Yeah.
And in a competitive market. So it makes it very difficult.
Yeah, definitely. No, actually, you guys did the perfect job of me not asking a question, and then you took it and ran for it. I think
Sorry.
that, no, it's perfect. That's what I wanted to have happen. So at least I threw out some random words enough that you guys were able to make conversation out of it. I think it's probably, because I'm a Vandal, Jeff's a Cougar, so he took that higher knowledge he got from being a Cougar and just, put it into a great form, which happens often, and it'll happen when we play each other in football this year, right? Like we all know the Cougars are going to win. I'll be the first one. But I think it's about, we're in America, right? Free markets, and that role that you both talked about the role of the government regulatory functions and the free market, a home builder, a home seller, a home, listing agent. How are we going to ultimately make the most money for us, which is how free markets work? And, the type of housing product that's needed for workforce, for entry-level workers that are out there, there just aren't market forces because of all the things that we just talked about to be able to make that happen in a free market system. And so then, Jeff, you talked about some of the stuff that City of Pasco's looking at, the stuff that Walla did before. And I think that's where we really want to be in the future, is that we've got housing choices and housing options, and that we've got those for a range, because we've even heard stories from our board members, that are trying to hire people and get them to move here at some of the higher salary ranges in our community. and they didn't find at the price point that they could afford from a market that maybe isn't like a West Side or a Bay Area, but some other communities that they could work something out, and they passed on the job because of that. So it's across the board. It's really we want to keep on going where the Tri-Cities has always been. That having affordable housing and a good lower cost of living is something that we've always been able to sell as we get new companies and new jobs in there. And so I think that's ultimately the goal. And I appreciate this conversation because it gives us some good data and some good facts to try to say, okay, what can we do maybe that's unique and individual at the Tri-Cities to help some of these issues? The commuting times is a great point. I think a lot of times you see that when our housing prices have risen like they have, that all of a sudden that commuter becomes your affordable housing, whether it's Benton City, Prosser, Connell. But now when gas is $4.50, $4.25, then it kind of cuts into it. So for the workforce, it's like this sliding scale, right? So we're down to about 5 minutes. We do have a couple questions, so let's get into those. The first one is, as the housing growth continues and will continue to rise, there are transportation concerns. As you're talking to commission city councils, transportation and roads part of that discussion, and our local state elected officials part of this conversation to hopefully swing the tide of transportation projects to get approved for our region. I might jump in on this one first and just say, we just talked about it, right? So transportation and housing affordability is one of the things. Chris Johnson was on last time, and he talked about the state transportation bill, that there weren't necessarily any new construction projects listed in the transportation bill, really east side of the Cascades in general. I do know that all the local jurisdictions are working with our congressional offices to have specific asks for growth-related transportation upgrades as far as interchanges. We've written letter support for a couple from City of Pasco, City of Richland, City of Kennewick as well. So the local governments are trying to do it with other funding sources than maybe state transportation dollars outside of the normal formula. But anything else you guys want to jump in on this one? Have you seen transportation as it relates to housing and housing growth an issue?
We just, the short and simple answer is we support that mobility, however that's going to happen. I don't support it if it just happens on the back of new construction. So if it's just going to be an impact fee that gets leveled on new construction, completely unfair. However, when you said all those tax dollars from those new gas tax that just went in and it's not coming here, that's a challenge, and that we would advocate for some of that coming here. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. The other one is, do you anticipate interest rates to continue to rise? And I'll just open that up. What do you guys think? It seems like it, when obviously what the Fed's trying to do is trying to lower inflation rates, and that's typically the way that it works. Jeff, you talked about they've already announced, right? They're anticipating 4 or 5 more, I think, this year in the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, I will tell you that when we started the year, our national economist was sharing with us that they expected 3 Fed rate increase. Then he says 4,
right?
Then he said 5,
wow.
And then now he said 6.
Yeah. Oh my gosh!
And because if inflation stays over 2%, that's where the Fed Reserve gets in there. Like they have to get that back under control, and so absolutely rates are going to go up. And so if there's any remodeling or refinancing, or if you wanted to get that pool, you better do it now, because it's going to be more expensive for sure.
It's good advice.
Yeah.
We are down to 2 minutes. We probably could talk about this for a whole day. And that's a good idea. It's something that we've talked about with our partners is, maybe we should bring both you guys and your organizations together with some of our public officials and some of the staffs, and really have a discussion about this. I know that everybody's already involved in it, but I think to make sure that we have the conversation and look for those opportunities, not knowing what they are. And I think there's so many, Jeff, you gave great examples from Walla, Bend, those places. There's things that we could probably learn from them, but I don't think there's a silver bullet, right? Like other communities have been through this before, and there's not necessarily anyone's. And Jeff's point about Growth Management Act is a good one, in that we really need to take a look at that. To do that, when Chris Johnson was on before, he talked about Oregon's actually changed theirs and tweaked theirs. Washington never has. There's places that we could start to try to address this statewide for sure. Ron, you got any closing words for us? Thanks for your time today. I really appreciate your information and really just the open discussion that we had. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah, no, thanks, Carl, and appreciate being here. And it's always great to be able to address the needs of our community. I think that to kind of piggyback on what Jeff was talking about, I think it's going to be important that the Home Builders Association, the Realtor Association, really work to advocate, whether it's the county commission level or the city council levels, for the things that are going to help lower the cost of building and help, change some of our zoning laws and things like that to be able to provide affordable housing. And I think that's going to be the challenge in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. Big skin, Ron. Jeff, any closing words for us before we sign off?
Carl, I'm going to keep it really quick. So I know it says
Yeah.
it says 10 o'clock straight out, but because you and Chris took me back to the 80s and 21% interest rates, there's a quote that I will never forget from Ronald Reagan, and he said, "A recession is when your neighbor loses their job. A depression is when you lose yours."
That's exactly.
That's good.
I will never
That's
forget that. And back in 1982, Tri-Cities pulled 45 permits for an entire year. Back in 1982 with 21%. So yeah, interest rates have an effect on housing. So it will start to have an effect real quick. Thank you for having me, Carl. Ron, always good to see you.
Good to see you, Jeff.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Jeff.
Carl.
Really appreciate your time. No, thank you guys both for coming on today, and look forward to more conversations coming up. And we'll see you again. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Okay, thanks.